So, a few days or weeks ago, Next.js 15 got released, and with that we now have React 19 support. And with React 19 we have a new hook, and this new hook is called useActionState. Now before you click off and say, hey Jan, who cares about the new hook? We have useState, we have all of this, why do I need a new hook? Well, believe it or not, this is probably one of the most essential hooks that you have in React, and it's very important that you know how it works. So right here in the documentation they say useActionState is a hook that allows you to update state based on the result of a form action. What does this really mean? This does not make sense. At least it does not make any sense to me. So let me show it to you. So right here we have my project, my code base, and inside of here we have a server action. What is a server action again? Really quick, let me explain it to you. A server action is a asynchronous function which runs on the server side. If I would delete this use server on the top, we would have a asynchronous function which would run on the client side. But if I add this use server, then this function right here runs on the server side, which means it's secure and you can call, for example, Stripe, create subscriptions and everything like that. Again, because this one's on the server, which means it's secure. So this is what we have right here. And what I do in this server action right here is first of all delay the server action, so the response. And this right here is 2000 milliseconds, or in other words, 2 seconds. And then right here, I also get through the form data my name. Now, what name do I get? Well, let me show it to you. I have created a form right here, and in the form, the user can type a name for a project. To see the code for that, let me go right here to the index page. So let's go to the index page, and this is the code. It's relatively simple. We have a div, then we have a card, I center it in the middle, and then we have our form. And in the form, I have an input, and the input has a name of name. Wow, this is groundbreaking. No, it's not. But right here we have the name, right? And in the server action, I now get this input, which means I get the form data, the value of this input. Now, with this name, I can do whatever I want. And what I want to do in the server action right here is like small server validation. This means I want to check right here that the name, so this input which we have, has at least a length of 2, so at least 2 characters. So right here we can do a if check, and we can say, hey, if the name length is smaller than 2, then let me right here just return name must be at least 2 characters long. And if it's longer or bigger than 2 characters, then let me just say post created successfully. So now we have right here the server action, right? We return this, and I want to now somehow get this data in my form. So right here in the front end, because I want to show the error message right here. How do I do that with a server action? Because if you would use a route handler, then you would just get a response and you would render that. But server actions work a bit differently. You have to get it somehow else. So how do you get it? Well, you get the data through a useActionState hook. So if you go to the documentation, how do you set up the useActionState hook? Well, right here, you just call it, you invoke it, you pass a few parameters, and then you return right here, or you get returned a state, the form action, and a is pending boolean. So let's do that. Let me go back. Then right here above the return statement, I can do a constant. Then let me just get array brackets. This is what will get returned. And then this will be equal to useActionState. useActionState is imported from React. So we have now imported the useActionState hook. This means we are finished, right? Well, we are not finished. The useActionState hook requires 2 arguments. So right here they say expected 2 to 3 arguments but got 0. What arguments do we have to pass right here? Well, if you go to the docs, you have to pass your server action itself and then also a initial state. So if I go back to the actions, right here it's called create post. So let me copy the name. Let's import it right here from my actions. And then we want to also pass a initial state. And for the initial state, let's just pass undefined. So now we have right here created our useActionState hook, or you could say we initialized it. Now this useActionState hook returns 3 things inside of an array. So right here they say returns the useActionState hook returns an array with the following values. We right here get the current state. This is what we get returned from our server action. And then we also right here have the action. So a new action that you can pass as the action prop to your form component. So right here, if you can remember, we pass the create post server action. And inside of this array, we now get returned another action, which we can pass right here at the bottom to our form. And currently you see we get an error, and that's because I passed pass the create post. But this create post is used in the useActionState hook. This means right here in the array symbols, I can now get my state and I can also get right here my action. So let's just say state and let me get my form action. And now instead of using right here this create post, I can use my form action. So let me just delete that and let's paste my form action. So now we have initialized it, right? But we still get an error. Why do we have an error? Well, that's because right here in the actions in our parentheses, I have to get another param. And this is the previous state. And for now, we can set it as any. And this is needed to create a connection between the server side and the client side. And I will also come to that in a second. I will explain it a bit further. But for now, you can just set it to any. And you can set right here the initial state to undefined. So now we have that. We have our state. And this state is what we get returned from the server action. This means we right here return a string, a message. And I can now render the state. So what we can do is go right here underneath the input and I can just render in a p tag right here. So let's get the p tag and let me just render our state. And if I now save this and go back, you now see we have an error. Why do we have an error? Well, it's quite simple. This useActionState hook right here relies on a JavaScript bundle. This means we have to mark this form as useClient. And if I save that and go back, you see this error is gone. Again, the useActionState hook, whenever you use it, it requires a JavaScript bundle, which means you have to mark your form or the component, the page, whatever, as useClient. This does not mean that it runs on the client side. It just means that it requires a JavaScript bundle. And now right here, we can fill it out. Let me just pass one character. Let's click on save. And now we should see right here a message. And it says name must be at least 2 characters long. Now you saw we had a small delay. That's because again, if you go to the actions, I created right here a delay of 2 seconds. I could also change it to 1 second and then it would be way quicker. So let me again do a hard refresh. Let's say F. Let's click on save and now it will say right here, name must be at least 2 characters long. So now we have created the connection between our server action and the client side, and now we can get in our client side or in our form whatever we return from the server action. You could of course also change it to, for example, a status and a message. Let me show it to you. So instead of returning a string, let me return a object. Inside of here, let's get a status. Let's say error, and let me also return a message right here. And for the message, let me just say name must be at least 2 characters long. Let's also do the same for this return message, which is the success return message. So let's return that. For the status, let me right here just say success. And for the message, post created successfully. So now we have created that, which is nice. And if you now go back, you see we have an error. And that's because our state is not a string anymore, but now it's an object with 2 children, a status and a message. So I could now get right here the state.message. And if I now save that and again go back, it will still work the same. So if I get an F and click on save, you still see we get this error message right here, which is nice. So now we see that this works. So we get right here our message, or we get our state, and inside of there we get the status and the message. Either it's a success message or it's a error message, or in other words a success status or an error status. And this is nice, you know, but the thing right now is if I do a hard refresh and click on F and click on save, we don't have any loading state, and that's not what I want. I want to show a pending state for the button. In previous versions in React 18, you would now use the useFormStatus or the useFormStatus hook. Yes, that's how it's called. And with that, you would get a pending state. That's fine, but I don't want to use a separate right here component and again a separate hook. I want to do everything inside of this page. So what we can do right here is get the isPending boolean, because this is what is now returned from the useActionState hook. So I can get the isPending. So let's again go back. Let's get to the array right here and let's add a comma and let's get isPending. This is now a boolean and it will either return true or false. So if it's pending, then it's true, and if not, then false. And what we can do now is scroll to the bottom, and then right here for the button where I say save, we can do a ternary. Let's say, hey, if pending is true, then let me just return right here saving. And if it's not true, so if we are not pending, if we are not submitting, then let me just say save. We can now save that. Let's go back. Let me do right here a hard refresh. Let's say H and let's click on save. we now have the loading state or the pending state, and then we have right here our error message. Of course, we could also do a full message or a full name, so something which is bigger than 2 characters. So let's say right here this, let's click on save, we have our pending state, and then it says right here, post created successfully. Of course, you could now also, for example, call right here a toast. So we could create right here a use effect. So let's do use effect. Let's import that from React. Let's open that and let me add right here a dependency, and as a dependency I want to listen to the state. So whenever the state changes, I want to rerun the use effect. And inside of here we can now do an if check, and we can say, hey, if the state right here, the status is success, then let me right here just return a toast.success and with the message which I get from my server action. So again, we have a use effect, it listens to the state, so it always reruns whenever the state changes, and then right here we do an if check and we say, hey, if it's successful, then let me right here just return a toast.success and let me return the message. Let's go back, let me right here just type something, let's click on save. Now you have the loading state and then the toast right here. Alright, congrats, you now know how to create a connection between the server side and the client side, and with the client side I don't mean that this form is rendered on the client side, but with client side I just mean the UI. This form is still rendered on the server side, it's pre-rendered on the server side, but using the useClient directive we just get a JavaScript bundle. So now we know all of this, but let's now also talk about the initial state, so this undefined, and then also the previous state, which is right here type any. So what we can do right here is, as said, we can pass state between the client side and the server side. So if I delete undefined right here and just open a object and click on right here control spacebar, you see we have the message and the status. And what is the initial state? Well, for the message, it will be probably nothing, so just an empty string. And then we also have our status. And what's the initial state for the status? Well, it's also probably just an empty string. And then in the actions file, you could now get this previous state. So we could now again right here get our message and status, and we could use it right here. But this does not make a lot of sense, right? Because why should you use it? And that's also why in most examples and in most projects, you will never use the previous state and the initial state. In most use cases and most examples, this will be right here just undefined, and this right here will be just type any. You need that, you can use it if you want to, but it does not make a lot of sense. Now there's maybe one example where this makes sense, and let me show it to you. This is something like a counter. Okay, so now I have created an example so that you can understand how you can use the initial state and then also the previous state in your server action. So what we have right here is a counter, and if I click on increment, you see the number updates. But this is interesting because I don't use any useState right here. Everything is done through the server side. So right here we have our form, we have our state, which is returned from the server action, and then we have a button to increment right here at the end of the day our number. And then we have the useActionState hook. We pass our server action and a initial state of 0. So whenever we do a hard refresh, so if I go back and do a hard refresh, you see the initial state is 0. If I now go back, we then get returned right here a state and a form action. And if I go to the actions, we get our previous state, which is the number, and our form data. Now inside of this example, form data is not needed, but still it's great that it's here. And then we have our server action right here. I can delete the useServer, and all we do right here is just a return previous state plus 1. So we get our previous state, so right now it's 0, we add 1 and then we just return it, and then in the state we have the new updated number. So if I go back and click on increment, now it has incremented by 1. If I again click on increment, we now have 2, and if I again click on increment, we now have 3. So this is how this initial state and previous state works. At the end of the day, you have a connection between client-side state and server-side state. And at the end of the day, this is very cool because it almost eliminates the use case for a useState hook. You can do almost everything through the server side and only with this one hook. Alright everyone, congrats! You now know how the useActionState hook works, you know how to implement it and why you should implement it. And again, a quick TLDR of this video is the useActionState hook is there to, at the end of the day, get updates from your server action. So whatever you return from the server action, you can get it in the front end using the useActionState hook. And now you should know everything. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you liked and subscribed. I hope I can see you in the next video. And now enjoy your day and see you very soon. Bye.